Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to another second channel video. Today it is cold in Las Vegas, Nevada, which is just about as rare as a part of the United States which does not vote conservative, as you can see from this map. Obviously, most of the people live in the areas that aren't conservative, but the question still remains that comes time after time again when the world is looking at America's elections, which is why exactly is the United States so conservative compared to insert country here? And although there's a lot of things you can point to that aren't really so unique to just the United States, there are a few things I figured we could go through and address that, again, actually are unique, that make America so unique in its unique form of conservatism that you're going to see a lot over here. So first of all, let's talk about the key and kind of forgotten about thing, because the United States has a two-party system, of course. Lots of countries do but aren't so conservative, but the way the two-party system works here is actually more democratic in a way that favors a conservative bent. If you're curious as what I mean by that, then there is something called the primary process in America, where unlike for instance the UK or many other popular democracies of your choosing, the party leaders aren't chosen by the party. Instead, they are chosen by the people. Admittedly, the people have to be in a lot of states, they have to be members of the party, but still there is kind of an open process where Republicans can vote for a Republican president candidate and Democrats can vote for a Democrat president candidate, as well as all the third parties. But in America, people just don't care about that, apparently. I wonder if it's too dark to see me. To be fair, it's only like 4:45 p.m. I just forgot to realize how dark it can get, how fast here. So my bad. So, you know, there's two-party, primaries, and those primaries have a very heavy bent towards, let's call them small states. So, rather the, because everyone in America has this fear of like, what if California and New York ran the election? So instead, there is lots of, I guess a check and a balance on that, you could say, is the fact that if the way the primary process works is they have to go through Iowa first. Iowa is usually first spot because they have a clause where they always leapfrog anyone who tries to come first. Then it's New Hampshire, then it's Nevada, then it's South Carolina in general. And, that sounds kind of normal, like, oh yeah, it's actually pretty geographically diverse, except actually not. They're all very sparsely populated places. As we all know, rural voters tend to vote more one way than the other, but also they tend to not have too much ethnic diversity. Nevada, the state I'm in right now, has the kind of exceptions to that trend where there's more Latinos here than the nationwide average. But if you look at the racial breakdown, it's going to lean white, which in recent times, for whatever reason, has started to become a one of those two votes. So not only is it rural voters, but it's rural voters who are largely white, and it's largely rural voters who are largely white and who come from states that are outside of the outside of the kind of city kind of thing. So let's put it this way: of the 4 states that make up the first 4 primary processes, I looked into it, and South Carolina is the most populated. It's the 23rd most populous state, and it's the 25th most densely populated, and it is the most of the 4. So that helps put it in perspective for you. There is an outsized proportion weight given to the small states, even if you exclude the fact that they have an outside proportion already built into the system, already built into the electorate. And as a result, it means that, and because most presidential candidates end up having to win one of those 4 states, every Republican presidential nominee has won South Carolina. It's a bellwether for the primary. It means that South Carolina is effectively picking the president, and the politics of South Carolina are obviously going to be a little bit different. So one of the things about South Carolina that always comes up is the religiosity element. Obviously people there are, I think it's called Baptists, right? No, evangelicals, that's the one. So people in South Carolina tend to be evangelical, but that's just like a weird thing about that one state, right? No, here is a map of religiosity in the United States versus in Europe, which is, let's be honest, where most people who ask this question are from, because Europe is generally more left-wing than the United States, and also because, the English understanding is highest there, which means we can follow American politics and be like, wow, something sure is happening that's quite wacky here, right? So anyway, that's that's the 2 countries sitting right here. And if you look, the United States is incredibly religious, it going up to 90% in certain states, and you can see how most of the states that are pretty dark happen to also be the 4 states I mentioned previously: Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada. Actually not Nevada. I like that there's no love of God here. I wonder why. Is there anything about this state that yells lack of love of God? You know what? I don't see it at all, but that's what I love about it. But anyway, so there's a high religiosity element, and as we all know, religiosity for some reason has a you know, tint towards the conservative side. And you know, the obvious reason to me is that religiosity means you have this belief in God, this like bigger church system, even though Jesus was like very clearly, if you look into anything about him, a super, you know, it would be very left-lit. He would look like a mega socialist today. Like, he would be criticizing the left for not being left-left, you know, if you look at the things he did to rich people. However, you know, if you ignore that angle of it, which is admittedly a pretty big one to ignore, it's like, yeah, the church is your family first. The church, you know, like, you pay money to the church, and it's kind of a system there. It's kind of like an alternative government. It's not that they're anti-government as a whole, it's that they're anti that particular type. So the United States of America is very conservative because both presidential candidates, and there is a two-party system, have to be able to be approved of by voters who are more likely to be conservative on average, and that's one of the factors. But it goes even more deep than this, I would say. You know, if you look at the demographics of the United States otherwise, they tend to lean into directions that make things that will be unthinkable in Europe be very thinkable and very just practical here. So for instance, in, you know, like, if you look at most European countries, biking is something they're at least trying, at least in big cities, you know, to try and get going, as well as many other forms of alternate transport. If you look at the price of petrol, for instance, in Europe, you'll see that it's significantly higher. And the reason for this is because in, you know, like a European country, there's lots of competing groups that want a government's, you know, money. By that I mean they want the government to take their money and spend it on their particular priorities, because it's being taken from them anyway. And so as a result, there are groups like the farmers who want farming subsidies. There are groups like the motorists who want more roads, fewer road taxes, etc., etc. And you know, in Europe, these groups might have to vie against the many other more populous voting demographics. But because of the huge, you know, look at the lands, look at the size of America compared to all of Europe combined. You know, like, the size of this country means there's a lot of farmers. So things like, you know, like pro-farmer policy, which is actually incredibly socialist when you look at it, but whatever, ignoring the fact that you give them money to compensate for their bad years, which you take from them on the good years, in theory at least, but not in reality. By the way, if you look at it, you're like, okay, so farmers, very popular in America. So farming subsidies are something that are just a given here in a lot of places. If you look at, for instance, you know, the motorist groups, which in Europe are kind of, you know, they're big, but they're not the single biggest group. Almost everyone in the United States needs to drive a car. There's only one city actually where the majority of people living there do not own a car, and it's New York City. And you can kind of work out why no one drives in New York. There's too much traffic, as a result, like, most Americans drive cars, so regardless of party platform, left or right, you need to appease those people. Like, even though road taxes and, you know, like, taxing people who are doing all this polluting might be good for environmental reasons, it might even be good for the same people who drive those cars. If you make slightly fewer people able to drive cars and you improve the public transport using the money, everyone wins, because people still driving cars have a better experience, people on public transport have a better experience. You can make that argument perhaps in a European country. You can't make that argument here, because you are saying to people who already have cars, who are already driving to their destinations, who maybe only know that as their way of life, and therefore think of public transport as being the thing for losers, widespread stereotype here, that you can't just fix by being like, oh, but it's wrong morally, you know? I'm walking down some really weird roads, by the way. Let's choose not to question it too much. Like, why are there only 2 cars here the entire time? This is Vegas. It's a busy weekend, but the interesting thing, if you are to look at the United States of America, is that the general makeup here does not necessarily make more conservative. It just makes things that in Europe are associated with conservatives. Low taxes on fuels, something the conservatives, you know, a conservative party of your country's choosing might be pushing for. Over here it has to kind of be the standard, because to get around a country this vast, when everyone has cars, kind of a necessary thing, right? You know, like, the push of, you know, bike cycling infrastructure kind of makes sense when your country is as small as the Netherlands, perhaps, although it's still a big country, absolute terms, but doesn't make as much sense when your country is this size. And that's where I want to go into my final point here. So, why is the United States so conservative? Even ignoring the religiosity, ignoring the motorist element, ignoring the land size area, and obviously an area this large is going to have mostly rural voters, and the American electoral system has a heavy favor towards you know, I guess not towards land. People say land, but really what they mean is states. The number of states has a huge benefits for them, and it just so happens in the middle of America, where the fewest people live, is where the, you know, like, a lot of highest density of states per person are, because they were trying to stuff the states for various anti-slavery reasons a long time ago. which means, I guess if you think about it, ironically enough, the liberal, which I hate that Americans call left-wing liberal, it's not how that works, America, but the liberal side of things from 100 years ago, you know, let's not have slaves anymore, is part of the reason why there is such a conservative leaning land in the United States in the middle there. But if we brush that one to the side, oh, it's nice to be on a road where people might not be able to murder me, and it might take days for someone to find the body, by the way. But anyway, if we leave that to the side, right, let's just brush off a pretty key thing about Americans' electoral system, their primary system, which is part of the electoral system. Let's brush aside the demographics. Let's brush aside the very nature of the country being that, you know, unlike the average person from Scotland, 98% chance of being white, 90-something% chance of being Scottish. Ignore the fact that there's no real demographic that makes up America. It's lots of different ones because it's an immigrant nation, and therefore people who come here on average are more likely to be people who are, let's call them opportunity seekers, and therefore more likely to be sympathetic to low taxes on business or, you know, like on high earners, because they hope to one day be there. I find it so ignorant when people from Europe are like, oh, Americans think of themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. Why do they care about the millionaires? They'll never be one. It's like, what the, have you just eternally come to this fact that, like, there is no way in your life you can be any form of wealthy beyond what you have right now? Is that what you want? Do you want everyone to think themselves? Do you want people to believe that there is no path forward? But again, ignoring that, if we just brush that all to the side, ultimately the thing about the United States that makes it pretty unique, pretty interesting in my opinion, is the fact that it almost is, you know, like if conservative means small government, the United States is almost small government by nature. There is a new hotel that has been built here in the last week since I walked here. That is so weird to see. There is a Virgin hotel over there. Ties this channel into the third channel now. I did a Virgin hotel review in San Francisco, whatever. Anyway, so I want to stay on point. The whole point of the United States has this kind of small government thing built into it. The federal government has only ever meant to be the size that it needs to be and not bigger. The power is meant to remain in the hands of ideally the citizens, but then the states get to decide. And although that meaning has been washed away over the last couple hundred years, because power centralizes, that's how power works in general, it's fine, it's whatever, it still means that there is this kind of eternal check on the United States. Unlike Europe, where the executive branches and the legislative branches, you know, the person in power and the people who make the laws are combined, in the United States that isn't true. And even then, going a step further, there are all of the state legislatures and all of the state, sometimes executives, and it basically means that there's so many positions of power for so many different things. Although there is one central person who is seen to lead those people, you know, in general, the president gets to lead the direction of things, the exact details do get left up as much as possible to states. The exact details do get left as much as possible up to as many individuals as they can. And that's kind of like a built-in, if you want to call it small government, you can call it that. That's a built-in, if you want to call it, you know, conservatism, you can. But the United States inherently is built very differently to other countries you might be trying to compare it to. And that is why the infrastructure is going to be so hugely different and tilted towards people who own cars. That is why the tax rate is going to be so differently you know, set up, because again, people very different priorities here. Actually, no, there's a final thing about that small government point, because you might say like, oh, so they got a small government and it sucks. The truth is, in the United States, you can pick your level of taxation. There's always going to be the mandatory federal income tax, which goes up to something like 37 or 39%, just under 40% of your income at the max rates, but much lower in the more marginal rates. But if you want to have, and yeah, the services they provide federally are very weird mix and match. Like there's healthcare, but only for certain groups. You have to be like either, you know, there's weird, you know, the US government spends the most on healthcare of any nation in the world. Also, military, US government spends the most on military of any in the world. You know, the bare basics that you can't really opt out on, those are done federally. But then everything else, you can kind of pick and choose. If you want to live in an area with high taxes, if you think that you having money as someone who is wealthy is a sin and you hate it and you wish you could pay more money into the pot for collective good, I mean, charity's a thing, but if you hate charity because you want it to be mandatory, you want it to be taken from you by the government, you can move to cities that have insanely high tax rates. California as a state has a 13.3% maximum income tax rate, bringing that 37% up to 50.3%, because recently, they're called the tax cuts in the Trump years, but they really increased taxes if you live in a high tax state, i.e. a democratic state. You know, people, that should be something people complain about more. But anyway, you can move to an area with a lower tax rate or a higher tax rate. The higher tax rate areas obviously have more services. If you want to move to rural Tennessee, the income tax rate is there as 1%. I think they're phasing out to 0% by 2022, but there is no income tax there besides your federal return, and you won't get services. Basic things like water, dig your own water well, you know, bitch. Like, you want to have a trash collection. This blows my mind that a lot of people in the South don't have a trash collector. You have to hire a private person, pay them X amount a month, and they'll come take away your trash. Weird stuff, confusing to me. But in America, you can pick your taxation level effectively. If you want to be in the most high tax places, you can be. If you want to move around your tax burden, I mean, for instance, New York has slightly lower income taxes but higher property taxes. You know, for instance, if you want to have a place that's got the highest property tax but slightly lower sales tax, I think it's New Jersey. Actually, does New Jersey have a high sales tax? I know Delaware doesn't, which means effectively you just cross the border and then you make some money that way. But in America, you pick your level of government much more than you can in a country that is unitary. You know, America is a federation, a state that consists of 50 states, whereas most of the countries, the ones you compare them to in Europe, are one country, one government, and that government has to move all in the same direction at the same time. Whereas the United States has the luxury of, if, you know, California and Washington want to move left, while South Carolina and, I don't know, Florida apparently want to move right, they can totally do that at the same time. And that's why the president is always going to have slightly fewer powers, and that is why the United States is always going to, by default of having this multiple choice system, is always going to have a slightly more conservative bent, because the people in the conservative areas can pick more conservatism, and the people in the liberal areas can already just pick it. They don't have to have this same fight that has had everywhere else. People don't see it that way though. But yeah, fun fact, if you live in Tennessee, rural Tennessee, and you're like, man, I wish the government would take more from me and in exchange give me services, there's plenty of great cities out there. Wow, you know, would you like to move to Las Vegas, Nevada? Yeah, this was a whole ad by the Las Vegas Tourism Board. You know what's the only thing cooler than gambling 1 week a year on holiday is if you gamble 51 weeks a year not on holiday. That's right, buy some gambling. But no, yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this video. It's a nice little street we're in right now, right? Look at that 7-Eleven. I love the neon vibe that you get in Las Vegas. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it a lot. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. And as always, second channel, don't care. Goodbye.